Recording in progress. wonderful panelists for session 3. Let's have your cameras on, please. Morning, Ben. Morning, Quarian. Morning, Maud. Perfect. Shall we begin? All good? Are we being beamed on the big screen in COPEX? Just waiting someone to confirm.
Can I just check with the team from COPEX? Are we good to go? I think we're a go. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes, you can go for the session now.
Annyeonghaseyo. Hello. Good morning. I'm Gavin Heyman. I'm honored to be the Executive Director of the Open Contracting Partnership. I'm very excited to be with you live and direct here at day 2 of COPEX. So we are going to discuss infrastructure. The world needs more infrastructure. It underpins efficient, modernized economies, and investment in infrastructure is going to play a key role for us all to stimulate growth as we build back better from the pandemic. We are talking about huge sums of money, and between February of 2020 and August of 2021, governments around the world announced over $3.2 trillion worth of infrastructure investments as an economic stimulus. And that's over 3% of global GDP across G20 members and others. So we know there's going to be huge sums of money spent. And at the same time, there's a very large gap between the price that governments pay for infrastructure and the quality they get, perhaps as large as 30%, says the IMF. In this session today, we've got some of the leading global thinkers who are going to try to work to close that gap. And the session is going to focus on how we can build infrastructure better, but also how we build the right things in the right place, both to meet the urgent needs of citizens, but also that of the planet, and how we tackle the urgent environmental challenges that we have in front of us. And we have bit by bit in the title, because we're going to focus on the practical steps that we can take to actually achieve that. So let me introduce our fantastic panelists today. So first of all, we have Bernadine, or Ben Burns. And Ben works with me at the Open Contracting Partnership, and she leads our work on infrastructure. But she also has a very distinguished career globally, working on good governance in infrastructure, and she's a lawyer with a background in clean technology. We also have Maud Devotibu, who is the Director of Practical Tools and Knowledge for the Global Infrastructure Hub, which is a G20 endorsed and supported think tank really driving forward thinking about infrastructure. And previously, she's led major projects at the French Finance Ministry and elsewhere. So she's got that direct hands-on experience of actually doing this, both working with the private sector and the public, which she's sharing with us today. Next up, we have Siti Juliantari Raman, and she is the Deputy Coordinator, Indonesia Corruption Watch. It's a leading good governance civil society organization in Indonesia. And Siti also has a background in criminology, which I'm super excited to hear how that applies to infrastructure. And I also have a background in criminology, so it's nice to have a fellow thinker kind of looking at the hidden systems that underpin human behavior. So that will be super exciting to hear about that. And then finally, we're delighted to be joined by your own Hwaeun Jun, who is the Deputy Director of Construction Business Management Division at the Public Procurement Service of South Korea. So an awesome set of panelists to answer these incredibly difficult questions. Perhaps, if I may, we will kick off with Ben. And Ben, as I said, you've got this really kind of distinguished career working on good governance in the infrastructure sector. And I think you've worked in it in almost every continent around the world. So I'd love to know from you, what do you think is actually working to improve governance and how we might scale those efforts up globally? Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Well, first of all, thanks so much to our friends and partners at PPS for inviting us to co-host this event. Really excited to be here. Sad that we couldn't be there at Kintex in person, but so excited to be doing this with you. And thanks for your great question, Gavin. That's a really tough one. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully You will see it shortly. Does that, can you see it? Hopefully, yes.
Yep.
Great, perfect. So, how do I hide this? I'm trying to hide the thumbnail, but hopefully, there we go. All right. So I'm going to talk in the next 10 minutes or so on what we've been doing at open contracting and open contracting for infrastructure, what it is and how it can help make infrastructure work for people, planet, and prosperity. But first, I'd like to take us through some context. So as we all know, the world is trying to emerge from this pandemic. And as we do that, governments are increasingly turning to infrastructure investments as a mean to stimulate growth. And this is important because we know that every dollar invested in infrastructure returns at just under $4 as return on investment. So that's a lot of money. That's economic growth over 20 years. It's nearly 4-to-1 ratio return on investment. We also know that 100 billion in infrastructure investment adds about 1 million jobs, and that's much more of the projects are transport related. And so that's why we've seen in the first year of the pandemic, that governments all around the world have been announcing huge stimulus packages. So that totaled up to 3.2 trillion in infrastructure investments as stimulus. That's about 3.2% of global GDP across G20 members and guest economies. In the USA alone, the bipartisan infrastructure law bill was signed, and that provides about $1.2 trillion in investments over the next 5 years. And similarly, in the UK, you can see about 650 billion pounds that will be invested in infrastructure in the next 10 years. So that's a huge amount of money. And the bulk of the spending will come from public procurement. Now, the problem is that we know that public procurement is government's #1 corruption risk. And we know that for infrastructure investments, particularly, that 30% of that is often lost to corruption, mismanagement, or inefficiency. And we often talk a lot about corruption, but we know that it's not always corruption, right? And I think this is a really important point to make, because it can just as often be inefficiency, mismanagement, or incompetence. So in this photo, you'll see it's a real photograph. It's not something made up. It's a photograph of as you can see, a toilet, and there are some clear problems here immediately that you can see. There are no stalls, there are no doors, there are no sinks. But most important of all, this project was meant to be a girls' locker room. So something has broken down here in the value chain, and as a result, the project that was needed was not actually delivered. So we're seeing that because of these deficiencies in the way that infrastructure is planned and procured and delivered, vital life-changing infrastructure is not being delivered to people who need it the most. So what we need to do as we start to emerge from this pandemic is think about how we can minimize these losses and maximize the value of every dollar spent. So the question is, what can we do about it? And here we are with open contracting, and that's where open contracting can help. So open contracting has fast become a global norm. It's been endorsed by the G7, the G20, the OECD. We work with multilaterals and bilaterals like the World Bank and the FCBO, and we also complement initiatives like EITI and COST and BODS and many others. So open contracting is also a global norm within the Open Government Partnership Initiative. At last count, I think in 2019, we had over 190 open contracting commitments in OGP national action plans, and that number continues to rise. So it's very much becoming a tool for governments around the world to improve the way that public money is being spent. But the question is, what is open contracting and who are the Open Contracting Partnerships, or OCP? So OCP, we work with governments, businesses, civil society to transform public procurement to deliver better goods, works, and services for everyone. And we do this using the power of open data and effective participatory mechanisms to help reduce corruption, improve efficiency, enhance competition, and build trust. Increasingly, we're seeing open contracting being used to deliver these broader economic, environmental, and social goals too. Now, you'll see in this slide.
Ben, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, in mid-flow. I just want to check the slide share is keeping up with you. Just wanted to check with our distinguished host that the slides are moving forwards as you talk.
Oh, good question. Can you see my slide? Like, what is the slide that you see?
I think we're possibly still looking at the introductory slide, just to check. I'd hate people to miss the wonderful pictures you'll be sharing, that's all. And apologies, everyone, if you're seeing them. Someone would unmute and let me know. I just
no, it's a good question.
Just to make sure it works.
Can folks
yes, so thank you.
Yes, we only see the cover.
Oh yeah,
you only see the cover.
If you go to slide, oh yeah, thanks. Good. I'm glad I checked then. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. But I'm 8 slides in, and my beautiful slides have been missed. I'm gutted. but hopefully my explanation was clear enough. And thanks so much.
I could listen to you all day, so
I'll say more things like that.
So I'm just wondering if we could scan them forwards. It might be if you go to share mode where you're just presenting the slide that's on your screen rather than in full view mode. That might help.
Oh, yeah.
It's Google Slides, isn't it, you're using? So I think it's under, if you go to slide, under slide, and then show, that might scan them forwards. Or you can do it manually like that by clicking on that slide and having it come up.
Do you mean like so? Have you?
If you go to presenter view, it's just popped up as your
presenter view.
I'm ever so sorry, everyone. There we go. Now I think we're seeing it scan forwards. I think you have to click on each slide as you go through it.
Ah, okay. That's fine. If everyone can see it, that's and so am I just checking with the team in Korea if I did the slideshow, it's not moving forward as I go, right? So if I go back one, are you seeing the green slide or no? Team at Kintex?
Now what we see is slide 8 with the green bubbles.
Now I think you're in share mode. This could be good now.
Okay, great, fantastic. So here we are, recap, open contracting, what do? We work with data to transform public procurement. And I was just about to talk about this next slide here, which is about our data standards. Hopefully you can see that, but shout if you can't. So at the core of our work are these 2 data standards, the Open Contracting for Infrastructure Data Standard, you'll see here at the top, and that can link to the Open Contracting Data Standard and also the Open Contracting Standard for Public-Private Partnership. So these data standards are really important because they help.
I'm ever so sorry, Ben. You're going to hate me for this, but it's not scanning forwards again, so people can't see. Maybe fasten on the data standard slide, and then yeah. Right, now I think when you click like that, it goes forwards. But unless you physically move it forwards, it's not doing it. Now we're looking at your data standard slide, so that's great.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully this works. So the data standards are really all about helping different stakeholders publish and use standardized, structured, machine-readable open data in a timely manner so that it's easier to understand what works and what doesn't. And from there, you can start to identify reforms and solutions to make things better. And this is especially important for infrastructure because we know that infrastructure planning, procurement, and delivery is often characterized by multiple actors working at multiple different levels and multiple processes and multiple contracts and different systems. It's often very siloed, it's fragmented. They often don't have joined up approaches of coordination. I think people often think of governments as a huge monolith, all operating, as one. But the reality is that there are different departments and different teams and different systems and different platforms, all doing different things, and they often aren't able to talk to each other. And what this means is that there are also long lead times from design to execution and then to completion. And then there are multiple variables along the way. And you think about breaking ground in an infrastructure project, you could find any number of things, right? In the UK, it's the golden-toed newt, which is the bane of any contractor's existence. Or it could be archaeological discoveries or other things, human settlements, things that are unforeseen. And it all makes it very difficult to deliver infrastructure efficiently or effectively. And so our data standards help to overcome these challenges. It lets you join up data so you can see what's happening on projects and contracts and understanding how infrastructure projects are performing overall. So it means that these different actors can better coordinate and they can work together to build back better. And better coordination means better efficiency, and better efficiency means you can start to maximize the value of every dollar spent so that we can start to squeeze that $18 trillion infrastructure investment gap so people get more of the infrastructure that they actually need. But the question is, what does this mean in reality? It's great to talk about this stuff in theory, but I'm going to show you now some real life examples of how this has played out around the world. So it means that you can go from something like this, which is a real photograph, again, not doctored, of a procurement office, where procurement information exists in rooms and rooms just like this one, filled with files and paper that was impossible to use and impossible to manage. So you can go from something like this to something like this, which is a digitized, transparent procurement system that's easier and faster to use. And we know in Korea as well, there are so many lessons that can be learned from CONNEPS, which is the transparent e-procurement system. And from memory, I think when it was first launched, there was a saving of almost $1.5 billion in costs, and savings for businesses also topped out at about $6.6 billion. And time taken to process bids dropped from 30 hours to just 2. So that's huge efficiency gains there that we can see from this type of digitization of procurement. Similarly, here you can see an example from India, and we've got a team from India in session 4 later on. So do come along and join us for that. So the work that we do in the data standards and helps you to do analysis like this. So this is a health infrastructure dashboard that helps to map public procurement to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we know that it's really important to build infrastructure that can withstand shocks, because a country's readiness to deal with epidemics is linked to the strength and quality of its infrastructure, which means that the better the infrastructure, the stronger your health security. And next in this slide, you'll see that this type of work that we do at Open Contracting also means that you can start to build infrastructure that meets real and urgent human needs. So this is an example from Taiwan, where our partners on the ground joined up public procurement data on flood infrastructure, so flood barriers, sluice gates, things like that, with environmental data. So where floods are happening, where it's most frequent, where it's most intense, and things like that. And the idea is then with this analysis, you can then start to see whether the public infrastructure spending actually matches the environmental needs. And again, our partners, Civic Data Lab in India, are going one step further, and they're adding an additional overlay for social indicators and vulnerability indicators. So looking at things like poverty, losses from floods, whether it's agricultural losses, property losses, loss of lives, things like that. So you can then see not only what is being spent on flood response and relief and whether it matches up with areas that experience the worst and most intense floods, but you'll also be able to see whether the poorest and most vulnerable people are actually benefiting from this type of public spending. So you can see whether the money is being spent in those places that need it the most. And this in turn helps government decision makers to prioritize their spending and channel funds to where it's in greatest need. Similarly, you'll see in this slide an example from Malaysia, where the Bill Casa project helped governments to identify the optimal locations for schools and hospitals, looking at things like capacity and saturation, population density, again, to make sure that they're servicing those areas where there is a gap in these services and not just building schools in areas that already have 1,000 schools and that are lying empty. So they're looking at things like the ratio of beds to patients, of teachers to students, desks to students, things like that. So this is examples of how you can use data and structured standardized data for good. And in this final slide, I just want to talk very quickly about a brand new project that we're working on with WWF, and that's how to use public infrastructure planning and procurement data to improve conservation outcomes. And as we begin to build back better, it's really key to leverage these opportunities for green recovery. And what I mean by that is growing the economy whilst at the same time reducing the environmental impacts. And part of this is really important because we know that ambitious infrastructure projects, so whether it's energy, transport, water, or urban development, are usually quite difficult to include as part of stimulus because they do take a long time to prepare. But it's actually quicker and easier to build green infrastructure like bus lanes or bike lanes, or expansion of electrical vehicle charging infrastructure, or retrofitting buildings so that they're more energy efficient, for example, through improved insulation or through motion sensor lighting or taps. So that's really key, and those are huge opportunities there for green growth and green recovery. And in fact, we've seen that the EU's 1.8 trillion post-COVID fund and also President Biden's stimulus package proposal are prime examples of this green growth agenda, as is the G7 Build Back Better World, et cetera, et cetera. And one last thing I'll say before I close is that in 2008, South Korea's stimulus package also included big investments in these sectors. So that focused a lot on building energy efficiency, which is a lot about what I talked about just a moment ago, and that was hugely successful. So my final message is just to say that there are real opportunities here for us to do things differently and to do things better, and so that we can then start to build back better bit by bit. So with that, Gavin, I'll hand back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben. And yeah, brilliant framing to move over to Maud, because Maud, obviously the Global Infrastructure Hub is the leading think tank endorsed by the G20. I do love your job title because you lead on practical tools and knowledge, right? So I'd love to know exactly about those innovations and those tools that you're seeing at the hub. Perhaps you can tell us about that, and then how that kind of maps over to delivering open, effective, planet-friendly, people-friendly, resilient infrastructure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Gavin. So for the one who don't know, the Global Infrastructure Hub, it's a G20 organization, non-for-profit organization, sharing insights and best practices on infrastructure for more resilient and sustainable infrastructure. So we do have quite a lot of practical tools actually at the hub, but tonight I'd like to highlight one of these tools, which is, I said tonight because in Sydney it's night already, but I'd like to share with you one of the tools called Improving Delivery Model, and it's to improve the way we actually deliver infrastructure project. So it's more about all the processes and innovation that we have been gathering from different countries and best practices. So just as Ben mentioned, also, you know that with the recovery and the pandemic and the recovery, it's really important to think about how to do ways in another way to deliver infrastructure, because we know that there is a lot of challenging in delivering infrastructure, and especially at the early stage of the decision-making process. And the IMF in this report found that 67% of cost overruns for major infrastructure projects originate prior to the contract award. So we really need to improve these early stages. So let me just, before, to give you a couple of examples, maybe to highlight some of the trends of the market around the need for improving the delivery of infrastructure. The first trend is as was mentioned before, the unprecedented demand and volume for new infrastructure. That's the case in the United States, that's the case in Australia, but that's also the case in a lot of advanced and, of course, emerging countries. The other trend is really the shortage of skills and a very tense market capacity, especially for construction, in the construction industry, again, in advanced countries, but also emerging countries, with a lack of engineers with qualification in a lot of different areas, and with the demand for skills, so in some countries 48% higher than the supply. Material and equipment are also under pressure. The third trend, which explains why we need to rethink the way we deliver infrastructure, is really about the rising risk to the solvency of construction players. Just 1 month ago, we saw again another major construction player in Australia that went insolvent, that's ProBuild. And it's really about the question due to the supply chain issue following the pandemic, as well as severe shortages of skills in the industry. So we know that if we want a sustainable infrastructure, we need also a sustainable industry to procure those infrastructure. And that's very important. So the other big trends of the market is really to increase and the focus outcome on climate transition, digitalization of infrastructure, but also we saw that more and more we have large and more complex projects that are still on the pipeline. Like in Europe, for example, I can give you the example of the Grand Paris Express, which is 200 kilometers of metro links in Canada. In Australia, the pipeline of project is really, really very high too, with the Sydney Metro and the Sydney Airport, etc. And so all that actually push for new type of collaborative model, contractual model to deliver infrastructure. And so we just identify a couple of key themes throughout this tool, which are efficiency, capability, collaboration, risk, funding and financing, and sustainability. And across those different areas, we actually have case study, best practices, and improvement examples to improve the way we deliver infrastructure. So let me pick one or two examples, and I can develop a bit later, but just one or two. So the first one is really about to perform early market sounding, and also really to have a better collaboration and dialogue with the private sector and with the potential contractors, consultants, and suppliers to inform possible works and packaging options. So that's really important, just not to scope the procurement, but also to scope the packaging options at early stage. So it's important for the procuring authority and the delivery authority to have this dialogue to actually shape the project and the package of the project to meet the capacity of the market, but also yes, and the supply chain that be able to actually bid on those tenders. So the other one is really about for more efficiency, and especially when there is major infrastructure project with a lot of uncertainty around the cost, to use more early contractual involvement, front-end engineering design, early contractual engagement, to provide early input into design and target price development instead of fixed price contracts with sometimes open procedure or open procurement procedure, which are not suitable or not always suitable for having the dialogue between the private sector and the public sector on major projects. So really to proceed by stages in cooperation with the private sector for example, the alliancing contract and ECI are really multi-stage processes typically used in highly uncertain environments where the project owner and contractor work jointly to develop a preliminary design, a project scope, and a target cost. In Australia, the Infrastructure for New South Wales released recently a framework for establishing effective procurement with a series of recommendations to improve the delivery of infrastructure projects. And we can find those early contractual involvement I was just mentioning. I have 3 or 4 more examples, but I can keep them for the second part of the discussion because, of course, I'd like everyone to really participate and yeah.
Wonderful. So I love the emphasis you've given about sort of practical examples from Australia and elsewhere, and you kind of mapped out the trends that you've seen sort of globally, and then the need for new models of collaboration with the private sector. I was going to ask about who in the G20 is doing a good example of that, and you're saying Australia. Are there Australia's often been a leader. You know, I'm kind of interested in just such a kind of rich world out there with so many other G20 members. You know, are there other G20 members where you see really interesting models emerging that are relevant to their local context?
Yeah, well, I would say that yeah, United States, Canada are trying the progressive design build more and more, especially to develop the huge infrastructure program they have ahead. I mean, in Europe, as you may know, there is the European Directive of Public Procurement and Concession Contract, which kind of shape the legislation around procurement. So I would say that the room for more maybe innovative approach are a bit less wide than in other countries. But yeah, really the other thing I want to say about Australia and other countries is really the pragmatic approach and the agnostic approach for contractual models. So it's not like there is one contractual model which is good, one contractual model which is bad, and opposing traditional public procurement or design build against alliancing a PPP contract or other type of contract, but it's also really to tailor the project with the contract. And the question of the contract should not be the first question you ask when you start at early decision-making process, but almost the last question, because the contract is supposed to to be suitable and to be tailor-made to the project and not the way around. And a lot of time, and we know that actually the first step in some jurisdiction is to choose a contractual model and try then to fit all the project and the characteristic within this contract, which is not the way to proceed. And that's why some, for example, the NEC type of standard of contract, where it's actually just a kind of a standard with the functional approach of the contract. So it's really about what type of payment mechanism do I want, what type of, instead of I'm in a specific type of contract and I need to fit this type of contract. So I think it's almost a change of mindset. And it's interesting in UK because, as you know, since the Brexit, they are exploring new procurement processes, and there is a green paper on procurement that have been published in UK, very interesting, about how to actually reshape procurement process around more innovation and negotiation, because they know that the open procedure for procurement is not really suitable with the lowest price and with a lot of characteristics, not very flexible. It's very good for off-the-shelf type of project, but otherwise for innovation, it's not the most suitable for public buyers actually, and to promote innovation and with the green criteria and the climate change. And we saw that a lot of things in the scoping early stage is kind of hard for the public buyer to actually know exactly what they want to buy. So this need for more flexibility and flexible model is important. So I really invite you to read this green paper on procurement from the UK.
Fantastic, thank you so much. It's really interesting. I'm based in the UK and I've been involved in the green paper, which is about transforming public procurement. And it's very interesting because you are exactly right. They're trying to shift from most economically advantageous tender, which tends to mean lowest price, to just most advantageous, and putting in climate and other social benchmarks into that, but also trying to do it in a replicable, fair way. And I've seen how the openness, because the other thing the UK is trying to advance is having open data across the entire life cycle of the contract using the Open Contracting Data Standard, and how you then use the open data to drive better buying. And I think one of the things you raised so fascinatingly is that commercial skills in government and how you raise that up. And I really reflect on your point about don't start with the contract. And there was some quite striking research I read the other day, which was saying that you have different standardized contracts across government, from simple ones for buying goods and services to actually super complicated ones for public-private partnerships. And in Canada, most people start with the most complicated contract possible because they think that more is more. So even though it's actually quite a simple project, people will go for the biggest, heaviest, most authoritative looking contract, and that may not be the right way to start. And it was really, really quite striking that it looks like government has done a better job if the contract's enormous. Whereas in fact, if it's simple and clear and people know what the key terms are and everybody's following them, that's possibly more helpful to better outcomes. So very practical advice. It was in your job title and you very much delivered it. Thank you so much. Let us now turn over to Siti Julian Tari, or Tari as you're known. And Tari, just Indonesia, right, is this obviously leading G20 member. It's an amazing, incredibly diverse sort of country. You know, if you can do infrastructure in Indonesia well, you could probably do it well in many different places. So, you know, like I would just love to know about the approach you're taking. What are the challenges you're facing in Indonesia?
Yes, hi Gavin, thank you for the opportunity, PPS and also Open Contracting Partnership. So yeah, I will share a bit what's the challenge when we talk about infrastructure in Indonesia. So just give a bit of context that in Indonesia, the current president have a priority on the infrastructure project. So if we see like maybe more than half of the public tenders is related to the infrastructure. And if we see the last budget in Indonesia in 2021, we also found that at least 30.7 billion USD goes to infrastructure. So it's a big amount of money, and it's not included the public-private partnership that you just saw. So it's decided because you know the information related to the PPP in infrastructure is very limited. We just can access it in the news, not in the government official. And with that situation, we found that there is the problem related to the corruption also in infrastructure. Like we found around 50% corruption cases in infrastructure also happened in 2015 until 2008. And in these 3 years, we get the ICW then monitor the cases, and we also found at least the state loss reach around 230 USD million. So it's a lot of money that it's not used very good, and then we also see that in infrastructure, I think the government still focus on the state-owned enterprise. So we see like in the last 10 years, the most infrastructure project dominated by the SOEs. And when we talk about this SOEs, it is not the institution that limited or not involved in corruption, because we found the SOEs in Indonesia that conduct the infrastructure project also involved in a corruption, and usually it's a big corruption related to the big amount of money, and also it is infrastructure that used for the national event, such as I still remember we monitor one of the development of a hotel for the national games last year in Papua. So this infrastructure has to be done before the national games happen in July. But until now, if we see, we visit the Papua, then we cannot find this building until now. So right now, we also monitor this procurement with the local journalists and also with the local CSO, and then the law enforcement agency right now process the case, because they also found a state laws in this procurement. And besides this, I think the government still have homework how they can involve more private sector in the government procurement, because in our statistic data in Indonesia, there is more than 1,000 companies, the big companies that could involve in the public procurement, especially infrastructure. But what we found is very less or limited companies that involve or maybe win the public procurement, especially infrastructure in Indonesia. And then related to the information, like I mentioned before, we also have a problem with the information accessibility because based on our research for the 10 years data in Indonesia, it's more than 80% the government procurement, they don't have specific titles in their procurement. Like for example, when they want to build a hospital, then they just put a hospital in the name or in the title of the procurement. So it's it's a bit hard to for the public or maybe for the private companies to understand what's the government wants or what's the government plan for the next year or this year procurement. I think that's the related to the accessibility. And when we also want to have a big picture about the infrastructure, Indonesia haven't had the project identifier. So when we want to see the big picture, that usually the construction or the infrastructure procurement also related to the consultation. So usually we cannot combine and then see the big picture, how many how much money that the government spend for the infrastructure project, because it's split in the different procurement, and then they don't have the data to connect these two. And right now we try to push the government to make these identifiers so that they can easily see how much money they spend related to the one project that usually it's related. I think that's some of the challenge that we face in Indonesia.
That's a very like a comprehensive list of challenges. As you said, they've got hugely complicated and diverse country. You spoke about the state-owned enterprises, the SOE, so very close links between government and business, and obviously that tracks back to Indonesia's history previously. And then you've also spoken about the lack of joined up information across government. You said project identifiers, how contracts and projects match. And then you gave us this really striking example of sometimes the infrastructure is very urgent, but it's not built, like the missing hotel in Papua, which sounds really quite shocking. So huge challenges. I would love to know, particularly because, Indonesia Corruption Watch is such a smart group of civic activists working with government to make things better, how you're doing that. What are the approaches you're taking to help deliver better infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think since 2010, we try to initiate not a system. At first, we just use spreadsheet to analyze the procurement data to see which procurement that have more potential to fraud. So we call it opentender.net. So this platform is designed to provide public contracting information and its potential fraud analysis. And currently we have 7 indicators that lead us to analyze which procurement is prone to be a fraud in that. And the indicators like contract value compared to the tender value, and number of awarded contract, and also we see how many contracts that happen in the last quarter in a year. So I could share my screen a bit to show what it's look like. Okay.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, this is the platform. Sorry, this is still in Indonesia, still in Bahasa, not English. So we have so many data in here because we have it from the National Public Procurement Agency. We have the dashboard. So the dashboard is divided to 3 categories. We have COVID-19 because, at that time, government not open for the COVID-19 procurement. So we think we need to, to make our own data based on the information that we have. And then the other one is from the infrastructure. So this analysis we use from the open contracting partnership. Thank you for helping us to build this. So we analyze the infrastructure data, like the presentation from Ben, like when we see so many documents and then it digitalized, and then we can use the data to be more useful, to be more informative. So we try to analyze the infrastructure data based on the competition and the market opportunity. How's the competition in infrastructure in Indonesia? We can easily see which companies or suppliers that won the most in this year or maybe in the last year. And then we also could see how the market opportunity in the infrastructure project, and the internal efficiency, how efficient the government, and we can see also how long the tender duration. Is it so fast, or maybe it could be like a month or 2 months or more than that. And then the other one is the public integrity. This one is related to the how the information they give to the public. Like I said before, how about the tender title, the description? Because if you see, like most of the tender have a very, very limited description, and it's hinder the public and also the private company to join the public procurement. And the last one, we also tracking the value for money for each for the procurement in infra. And then we also have the red flags. This is also one of the main feature in OpenTender.net. So we have the tender data, like we have the filter. So everyone in their area, they can customize what standard they want to monitor, because we see usually people, when we ask them, let's monitor the public procurement, they usually clueless because they don't know how to start, what procurement that they need to monitor. So the open tender will help them with the score. We have the 0 until 100. So when it's the highest the score, then the highest the potential risks of fraud for the procurement. So when they want to start to monitor the procurement, they can customize it. Like maybe they are in the central Java, or maybe they are in the South Sulawesi, so they can filter it, and then they can see which procurement, which could be infrastructure or any other things that they want to monitor. And since last year, if I'm not mistaken, this is also one of the improvement in open tender. We also have the standard for the procurement data, because the government not provide that. So we try to provide it to the other people in Indonesia. We implement the open contracting data standard from open contracting partnership also. So until now, if I'm not mistaken, there are around 10,000 procurement data that we publish with the OCDS, and this will make easier for the academician, or maybe for the public in general, to reuse and analyze the data, the procurement data that the government have. And maybe the last one, this is also related. What's the benefit when we have the from the open tender? I think this is some of the article that the journalists made that based on open tender. So they start to find the procurement, the suspicious procurement from the open tender. This one, the one that I tell before, the hotel in Papua. So this is, this is the picture of the hotel. Until now, there is no progress at all. And then we also, like this one in Yogyakarta. So we also found that there is, some suspicious in the development of the market. So they move the people in the street in Malioboro to one place. So they develop a market, like a modern market, I think. So yeah, when we visited or we check it this year, everything that we already stated about this tender is happened. Like, the building, it's not, the specification of the building is not met with the situation in the Malioboro, so that there is a flood when it's rain, and also there is flood in rain when it's rain, and the seller also complain about the building. Yeah, I think I will stop in this.
Wonderful. And just a very quick final question from me, because at your civil society, you're both pushing government to be better, but you've also built a constructive relationship, right, with the procurement agency of Indonesia. So I would love to know how you approach building that constructive relationship very briefly, because we've been emphasizing this need for constructive collaboration, but nonetheless to also push for change. So tell us about that from the civil society perspective.
Yes, so we believe that when we want to have a better procurement, we cannot just work with one side or the other side. So we have to work together. Like for ICW, we work with the government, we work with the public, especially with the journalists, with the academician, also with the local CSOs, because we have to create the demand that the people have to access the procurement information. And the other side, we also have to prepare the government, the stakeholders in the government, that they understand also, and then they also advance when we talk about the procurement. The most cases is related also to corruption. So we also we work with them. We work with the internal audit right now. We try to engage with them. We train them in many areas in Indonesia, at least 10 areas, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think more than 10 areas. So the inspectorate or the local inspector also use open tender as a tool for them to help them when they want to audit a procurement. So usually, they need to look more websites, or need more time, to choose which procurement that they have to monitor or audit. But when we, train them with the open tender, they see it's easier for them to get the information, because some of the information that we provide in open tender, they cannot access it from the other website, such as for the history of the suppliers. They can easily, see it when a suppliers, where is the suppliers who win a contract in a, at the same time, or maybe in the same area or in different area. So they cannot do that in the government system, because it's the government system just close to see the information in their area, not in the other area. So this engagement, I think it's a good, and we already talked with the Ministry of Home Affairs also. So I think they also interested to use this to use the open tender to the other local inspectorate, and we hope in the next year, maybe we could, get better auditor to monitor the procurement process.
Wonderful. Perfect. So talking about the value and power of joined up information. So if I may, I will now bring in Jun from construction business management, like a division of the public procurement service. And Jun, obviously you are helping to lead that vision of better construction and building back better in Korea. So we'd love to know how you are doing that, please. Oh, you might be on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. So can you hear me? Can you hear
yes,
me well?
We can.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is Hwayeon Jung, working for the Public Procurement Service. Thank you for having me in this workshop. So I'm going to share my presentation first. Just wait a second.
Perfect. We can see it.
Okay, right. So I'm so happy to discuss challenges and opportunities for the infrastructure industry of Korea facing the post-pandemic era in this session. Sorry, so I think maybe I have some problem with my presentation. So, okay, right. Yeah. First, I want to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 for the infrastructure industry. In the span of almost 2 years, the coronavirus has demanded sweeping changes from the Korean construction industry, like the other countries. During this period, the employment crisis caused by the economic downturn has been really cruel throughout whole industries. In addition, social distancing acts as a principle of life to reduce the spread of infection. Work through telecommuting and online meetings has become commonplace. With the importance of a non-face-to-face environment to prevent the spread of the pandemic, the digital transformation for stable construction procurement functions is accelerated with the first industrial revolution technologies, such as drone, metaverse, and automation and robotics. In particular, the impact of COVID-19 on the construction industry was serious due to the labor-intensive characteristics. Closing construction sites and restricting workers' movement has been shaking the identity of the construction industry. To make matters worse, the pandemic has become a constant risk for construction companies in the future, I think even after it recedes. As we begin to rebuild from the pandemic, infrastructure will play a key role to stimulate economic growth. Since 2017, so the size of the SOC budget has been reduced because of the government policies. However, the Korean government has increased the SOC investments since 2020 as a stimulus to recover the economy. This year, 2022, it is about 28 trillion won, equivalent to 230 million US dollars. I think it is an increase about approximately 41% compared to 2019 before the pandemic. As an emergency measure, usually to boost up the economy, the government's expansion of SOC investments is a kind of a priority for sure. But I think it cannot be a fundamental alternative ever. So let me move on to the post-pandemic era. There's been a paradigm shift in many areas of infrastructure. There's leading contractors to do many things differently than they did in the past. In order to build strategies and innovation back better, there are several factors that come as challenges and opportunities for the construction industry. First of all, the changes for the last 2 years will remain in place even after the outbreak recedes, such as work at home or this kind of video conferencing, and the importance of workers' health and safety, such as a staggered shift, employee temperature checks on the field, like these kind of things. And next, the pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation of the construction industry. According to social distancing measures, telecommuting, online meetings, and remote work using various applications have been carried out. And dramatic changes in production methods, such as modularization and factory manufacturing. In addition, projects will take longer than in the past. Construction schedules will not be the same as they used to be because of the disinfection disciplines. And also, the coronavirus created major global supply chain disruptions, especially from China. There's also a big portion of the construction materials. Many factories in China actually slowed or shut down during the pandemic period in many cities. Therefore, many contractors in Korea had difficulties with delays and shortages in items like steel, surfacing, and case goods. After experiencing those kind of difficulties, many contractors and many construction companies are willing to pay higher prices for suppliers coming from less risky locations for alternative suppliers. So next, we'll look at the cases, kind of challenges and opportunities for the specific cases of Korea. The Korean government announced the Construction Production Structure Innovation Roadmap in 2018. The main focus of this roadmap is the abolition of the construction area and type between general and specialized contractors from 2021 to 2023 on an annual basis. The purpose of this plan is prevention of illegal subcontracting through direct construction and technological competition. This year is the second year of this roadmap for the progress. So it is a really important time for the public procurement service to encourage a fair and transparent competition among construction companies to support the government's innovation in the construction industry. So this is kind of our roadmap. So actually, we have the kind of some specific certification between the general and specialized contractors. So actually, right now we have the 28 types of the certification, but we will reduce the type and areas into 30. So actually, our expected result is kind of to expand direct construction, and also we can enhance choices of users and technology competition. I think the second is here. I think this is a very important factor in Korea right now, because this is a really big challenge for the Korea. So it is kind of the Serious Disaster Punishment Act, which took effect in this January. The goal of this act is zero serious accident at construction field through the strict safety disciplines. In preparation for the enforcement of the act, it is necessary to reorganize the safety management organization and system, secure the implementation of safety management measures, and establish a comprehensive safety management system through the development of safety management guidelines. However, this kind of Serious Disaster Punishment Act is really strong and strict for the contractors and especially construction companies, because this punishment is not just the workers or not just the superintendents, it's for the CEO. That's why I think maybe a lot of construction companies are worrying about the contractions to avoid punishment. I think maybe this kind of contraction seems inevitable. The next thing is as I mentioned before, this kind of acceleration of the digital transformation. The crisis of COVID-19 is expected to accelerate this kind of digitization for the construction industry, and changes in production methods such as modularization and factory manufacturing. In addition, there are demands for promoting the first industrial revolution triggered before the COVID-19. Non-face-to-face demand for coexistence of daily work and currently has rapidly increased for reviewing construction materials or market prices survey. But I think this is very difficult to visit without visiting the field. That's why with these issues, construction industry was forced to incorporate IT technologies such as metaverse, AI, robotics, drone, and standard market price automatically registered in the construction cost integration system through RPA, the robotic process automation. This kind of the first industrial technology will be accelerated for the post-pandemic era. And the next thing is job changing. The enhanced focus on worker safety will have accelerated the industry's move to off-site construction. And job changing, the assembly line efficiency and climate-controlled environment of factory production can save on labor costs and shorten project schedules. But the strong and the advantage will take center stage and post-pandemic construction. Factory manufacturing for prefabricated and modular buildings are attracting attention to reduce labor-intensive field work and avoid project risks caused by infectious disease. A major shift from construction engineers to manufacturing and IT engineers may be required. But in the early days of the corona outbreak, employment in the construction industry decreased significantly due to field closures and difficulties in supply and demand of manpower. In addition, it became difficult for the order to find highly skilled workers. Those kind of things are the challenges and also opportunity for that Korean construction industry face. So right now, this time, what PPS is doing during this post-pandemic era, facing the challenges and opportunities in the infrastructure industry. Actually, as we try to build back better for an open and resilient and sustainable future, PPS is now trying to these kind of things. The first one, operating Korea online e-procurement system CONAPS is one of our major tasks of PPS. In order to meet demand for the first industrial revolution, PPS has been building the next generation CONAPS. The project started in March 2021, last year, and the new CONAPS will be unveiled in early 2024. It is 2 years later. Under this project, the system armed with the latest technologies, and it will be digitalized and user-friendly and fully contact-free and paperless, of course. Plus, it aims to redesign old underlying technology completely and build a system that adapts new IT technologies to provide users with year-round, trouble-free, and stable services. Under the circumstances from the pandemic, the innovative development of CONAPS became a critical task to resolve these kind of issues. So next collapse, we will make it possible the transformation to total contact-free procurement. We work from home throughout the entire procurement process, including bid and cost calculation and online assessment and evaluation of design. And also, our procurement system will be the more transparent and swift. So our project explanation and gathering opinions and training for business. So actually it was at the field, but it will be changed into an online platform. So, and also we can, a lot of contractors can plan for reducing the period for design evaluations through data management. And also, so it is a little bit regardless of the next connects, but I think maybe this is very important and new approach to field quarantine, because we can use the access control system and construction site by using this is TB, but I think maybe this kind of access control can be seen in the next connects, just I expect. So next one is the workers' attendance records. So actually, usually the superintendents manage this kind of workers' attendance records at the field. But after that, after the next collapse, we can manage the site workers in attendance and also their work history data through e-card system with the project over 10 billion Korean won. So maybe you can use the e-card system. And the other thing is very important is the recruitment matching service. So actually, nowadays the job crisis is really cruel. So PPS provides this kind of a system, the matching service, in estimating the total jobs required in construction. Job matching is done based on procurement data of workers and employers and remote field management. And then the last thing is the real-time on-site management. So by improving our working environment, managing working hours, wages, and insurance, and rooting out the possibility of overdue wages can be done in this environment. And also, so the real-time on-site management system can promote rapid response to disasters and infections outbreak, and also provide online employment of day laborers. And the other thing is so we can this system, the support for on-site inspection and payment by linking construction cost analysis. So actually until now, so I explained what PPS and what the Korean construction industry is facing as challenges and opportunities right now for the post-pandemic era. So, but actually we got some lesson from this pandemic crisis. The first one is, we should establish immediate preventive measures for construction sites and develop project management and early ordering plan to minimize damage due to pandemic. And also e-government infra like next collapse is essential for stable procurement functions. And also, we should enhance efficiency by simplifying procedures along with the digital process. And also, the procurement data should be utilized to improve the public service quality, and also it should be open. The pandemic has been accelerating digitalization and technological innovation and also job changing. The construction industry needs to find the opportunities and respond behind the challenges for the post-pandemic era in various ways. COVID-19 crisis tells us some lesson that there is no future for the industry if it does not secure resilience from the crisis and sustainability to grow further. Actually, thank you for listening for my presentation. So thank you.
Wow, what a holistic vision, because you've not only spoken about just like transparency and data, you've put together just reimagining the whole business of construction. You're thinking about the stewardship and care of the workers through to how to deliver the projects faster and better. The use of, I think you said, the metaverse, the digital twins of buildings on the internet to enable people to inspect them faster, contactless interaction between people to move things forward. So very excited. And how is that going? By 2024, you said you'll have the next generation of Connex, and you'll be baking open data and red flags and analysis into that second generation of Connex? Yes.
Yeah, sure. So as I said before, so the next Connapse will be unveiled in 2024. So actually this this next Connapse will include those kind of things, the open data and the transparency of all the data. So the important thing of the next Connapse is actually we are trying to incorporate all the data from the other public organization and public, or private companies and the other things, because Connapse is of course the number one e-procurement system in Korea, but some public organization don't use this Connapse. But in 2024, actually, the other public organization, I think maybe 24 public organizations, so will be incorporated into this system. So maybe after after building this next Connapse, I think maybe our Connapse will have all the data from the construction industry, so over the Korea. And also maybe the construction companies or the worldwide companies can share and can see all the data from the Connapse. Yeah. So I think maybe this is the important thing, incorporation of the other public organizations' data.
Wonderful. It's a very powerful vision. I think everyone's excited to see Korea's world-leading delivery of like construction projects and everything else. So I know there's lots of very distinguished and very smart people in the audience. So I just wanted to create a space for anyone, either in the audience online or in the room with you, Jun, to ask questions. I'll give a quick pause in case someone wants to do that. And looking sort of round behind you, see if there's anyone there, or is there anyone online who'd like to unmute and ask a quick question? If not, I have a couple of great ones to draw some threads out from what everybody said. But I guess I'll ask one then, which is about, we've emphasized data, right? And building that data culture, right, across government. And that's not easy to do, right? So I'd love to know, like how people are approaching that, what you think the first practical steps are. And that's to anyone from the panel who'd like to comment.
Sorry, Gavin, you broke up there for me a bit. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's about building, we've emphasized the power of joined up data. I'm really interested in how you build that culture of its like analysis and use across government, across business, across civil society.
I can start if that's helpful. So based on the work that we're doing, I guess from the outside of government. So our work obviously, as Gavin knows very well, spans multiple different stakeholders, right? So we work with governments, with civil society, with businesses, academia, media. It's a difficult thing to do. I think the starting point what we've found works really well is finding finding your niche. I think very often with this type of work where we're trying to improve processes and governance, very often people think that you have to start with everything all at once, but really that's not true at all, right? Like if you find your target or focus for something that's really tangible that needs improvement, that's where you can hone your efforts. So whatever it is, it doesn't have to be all of public procurement, right? It doesn't have to be every single thing that's being opened all at once, but it could be something very specific. In different places, it might be in health infrastructure, depending on what the need is. You might want to focus on that, or you might want to focus on education, or you might want to focus on really improving infrastructure service delivery, for example, to the poorest people, so to marginalized groups, to women at risk of poverty or violence, things like that. And from there, you can identify your coalition of champions or a coalition of supporters who can help you along that journey. And it makes it much easier if you have a target, if you have a focus of what you're really trying to achieve. If you're clear about the goal, and if it's something that's really tangible, then you can start to identify who your allies are, who your detractors are, and then from there start to develop a strategy for what you need to do. And then from there also, and linked to that, it's the same with the data. You don't have to have, if you're working on, for example, health infrastructure, you don't have to have all the data available all at once, because again, we know that not everyone has all the data collected available in one place, right? But you can start step by step, and we've seen it in Indonesia. They've with Indonesia Corruption Watch, the work that they've been doing over the last 10 years, they started with whatever data sets they could get their hands on, and then over the years started adding more and more data sets over the years. And just recently, last year, they got data on blacklisted companies, which is now further enriching that data set. Similarly, in India, we're working with our partner Civic Data Lab there, and they're working at the state level. So they started first in Himachal Pradesh, and then now they've expanded to Assam, really going where the appetite for change is, where the appetite for transformation is. And then from there, you can scale up over time. And again, we're seeing there's this really great activity now in India where, the work in Assam, for example, has really taken off. We've got great coverage now across all the districts, but we're also seeing now a lot of interest from other states, Karnataka, for example, but also at the national government, who are really looking to also scale this up nationally.
Perfect. Maud, I'd love your reflections on that from the hub.
Maybe I want to share a bit.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, the data is such a wide question, such a broad question, but I think what is working more and more, and especially in some European country or advanced country, is really those e-procurement platforms. So at early stage of the tender process for public procurement, I mean, the e-procurement is something which is almost now kind of standard in a lot of countries. But the question is, when you pass the stage of procuring your infrastructure, collecting data on existing contract during the execution of the operations of contract, that's where you have a lack of collecting the data, collecting the performance, and so to build depends what type of data set you want to build. But if you take one sector, the healthcare sector, the transport sector, whatever, and you want to collect consistent data about contract after during the execution of the completion, that's where there is a lot of really data gathering, data collecting, and data set and data platform where you can actually have all this data to exploit that for better performance of the public buyers. But again, I think it's really those kind of stages. Early stages, e-procurement work well in public procurement. Then after the signing of a contract, during the whole execution completion, it's not a lot of countries actually are performing very well from what we saw.
Such a great point, yes, because you're saying the procurement transaction, that bit may be captured, but the actual delivery, and I would say the planning as well. And actually, remember looking at Maximilian. So for the France area, the EGP system there, the contracts were visible while they were being tendered, but once they're awarded, they dropped off the platform and you lost that data. So it's such a great point. Sorry, Tari, you were coming in as well, please.
Yes, just a bit. One more point. I think also when we want to access the data for the government, I think we also have to show them the benefit when they open the data, because what in our experience when we talk with the National Public Procurement Agency, at first we do it by ourselves. We collect the data one by one from the website, and then after we show it, and then we show the benefit when they open the data that the public can help them to monitor the procurement. Then they easily to give us the data, like, okay, why you have to collect it from the website, just get it from our system, then you can use it to monitor the procurement data. And the other one, yeah, that's because usually the government don't want to be forced and pushed to open the data, so we need to bit by bit, I think, yeah, like try to make them open by themselves, like the other example from the emergency procurement, like the government haven't published the data, but after we meet them and then we shows the monitoring of the COVID-19 that it's really suspect for the corruption, suspicious for the corruption, then right now they open the data, even it's not complete, but I think it's the first step, that then it's a good one. I think that's from my experience.
Brilliant, thank you. And I see we're virtually at time, so perhaps I might ask you all just one sort of question in closing. So you can have one recommendation to governments, just one, right? I'd love to hear what your kind of top recommendation for the practical next step the government could take to build better, build right, and bit by bit. What's the first recommendation? And perhaps, if I may, we'd start with you, Maud. What would be your top recommendation as a G20 government approaches you for advice?
Which of course is really to have these climate change outcomes and sustainable outcomes embedded in the procurement process, in the criteria of selection from early planning. So now when you start new infrastructure, from the cost and benefits analysis to early decision-making process, all the way to procurement, you have to have those really how this infrastructure will impact and how it can reach those targets for the climate change and the carbon. And also the shift of mindset on the public sector side, because of the shortage of skills and need to really upskills in new technologies, and so really to go from a traditional public procurement to really a much more modern, digitalized type of approach.
Wonderful, that's brilliant. I'm going to write all these down and write them up and share them with the world afterwards. Please, Tari, let's hear from you next.
Yes, I think one point that we usually believe and brings in our advocacy in open contracting is the collaboration, that the government needs to collaborate with more people to build the more accountable procurement. So we cannot just okay, this is the government roles and not the public, but we have to work together to make it better. I think that's from me.
Another brilliant recommendation. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Gavin. So I'll go one step further from what both Maud and Tari said. So the first thing I think is really about user-led design. So making sure that the process is inclusive. So you build infrastructure that's fit for purpose, and that's what people actually need. Secondly, it's about including not just the improvements that you want to see in your tenders or RFPs, but actually pricing for them. Because I think very often we have all these grand plans for the wonderful things that we want from infrastructure, whether it's better worker welfare or more climate-friendly solutions, and that's kind of touched on in the tenders, but they're not actually priced for. So somebody actually needs to pay for them and commit to paying for them so that it's actually a kind of key deliverable from there. And then the third thing, obviously, is in the spirit of collaboration, making sure that there is proper coordination. The only way we can do that is everyone talking to each other and making sure that you have the right bits of information, in a kind of an interoperable way so that you can get that data in real time and work on it in a meaningful way. So those are my top 3 things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Jun, as a distinguished host, you get the final words. What's your top recommendation?
So can I add now?
Please.
So yeah. Okay. So I thank you for your opinions about the city and module and band. So I absolutely agree with your opinions. Actually, so these kind of things are very important for our government and G20. But I just, in my opinion, private opinions, so actually, of course, sustainability and the renewable energy and the incorporation, of course, these kinds of things are very important for the G20 and our country. But the safety is the first thing, I think. Yeah. So because nowadays everything is very fast. So the rapid, so as I mentioned before, the acceleration is the digital transformation and this kind of things. Actually it makes people very hurry. So it can, actually it can it can induce a lot of accident and and also the job losses. So I think maybe if we have some accident in the field and so I think maybe for the sustainability, resilience is, we don't need those kind of things anymore. So the G20 and also Korea as well. So I think maybe this year, so I said the zero accident to zero disaster punishment to act in Korea right now. So but actually this punishment is kind of low. But actually regardless of law, just I think maybe it should be kind of discipline for the people and especially the contractors and the public organization superintendent's mind. So I think maybe the kind of the sustainability and the incorporation is important, but like I think maybe OCP and the other G20 should I think maybe stress on the safety for the our lives, especially daily labors in the field. So that is my idea. Yeah.
Well, a perfect way to finish, thinking of the ordinary people building the infrastructure and their safety. That's brilliant. So had 4 amazing panelists, more than 4 excellent recommendations to make the world a better place. We're at our time. I just hope everyone will join me in a virtual clap. So thank you so much for such an interesting session. And thank you very much for the Public Procurement Service for hosting us today. Thank you.
Great. I think we can start. I think we're almost all here, missing one. So I suggest that we make a start, and then hopefully Carolis will join us in a moment. Elena, I see that you're here. Are you able to turn on your video? Perfect. Fantastic.
Yeah, and my microphone. Yeah.
Wonderful, fantastic. Well, hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for session 4, setting the sustainability standard for public procurement. So we have a really exciting session lined up for you all today. We have some great speakers you can see on the screen. I'll talk about them and introduce them in a moment. But before I do that, I just wanted to start with some house rules. So we like to keep our sessions pretty informal here. And so this goes out to everyone joining us online as well as joining us in person at Kintex. So we'd really love to hear from you. We've got some great speakers, as I've said, who are going to share with you their experiences and what they're doing on sustainability. But we'd also like to hear from you. So this is your opportunity to ask this expert panel some key questions, any burning desires that you might want to know about. And also we'd love to hear from you and your experiences. So please do feel free to drop your comments, your questions in the chat for those of you joining online. And for those of you joining in person at Kintex, there is somebody on at the ready, waiting to collect your questions as well. So please do feel free to do that. You can ask your questions in Korean as well. We have interpretation available. So please don't worry about that. We're very, very eager to hear from you. Carolis, hi, how are you? Great.
Great.
So, excellent to have you with us. You haven't missed anything. I was just going through the format of the session, and so basically just sharing with the audience, both in person and online, that we've got some great speakers. We're going to be talking a little bit about sustainability and the different innovations and strategies that we've seen around the world, but very eager also to hear from the audience and get to know what they're grappling with, what questions they have, and what their experiences are. So really encouraging everyone to participate. So that's where we are. Good. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce yourselves, because I always think it's much more interesting to hear directly from you rather than from me droning on about your profile that I've read online. So perhaps we can start. I'll just go left to right on my screen. Let's start with Erica. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. So my name is Erika Bozzai. I'm a senior policy advisor at the OECD. I guess OECD doesn't need any kind of introduction, as Korea is also a member, a really important member of OECD. So as I mentioned, I'm a senior policy advisor at the OECD. We have a special division, which is called Infrastructure and Public Procurement Division. So we are working with OECD and non-OECD countries on shaping public procurement policies and also shaping infrastructure governance policies. And of course, recently we focused a lot on sustainability issues as well. I joined the OECD in 2014. And before I joined the OECD, I worked a lot in my own national public administration in different ministries. I have to admit that I focused mainly on policy issues, developing public procurement policies, but also national development policies. So this is really briefly my background. I'm a lawyer. This is my profession. And I also, of course, did a lot of training and academic work on public procurement back in Hungary when I had more time than now at OECD. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Erica, and good to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us. So moving on then to Elena, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I will not have so much to say about myself like Erica did. But first of all, hi, everyone. So I work I'm from Lithuania. My name is Elena, and I work in the Ministry of the Environment. And I'm working only with green public procurement. So I'm a chief specialist in development, sustainable development and strategic change group, but that will not tell you much. So yeah, the point is that I'm working with green public procurement. We're trying to make it become a huge reality in Lithuania. My education is also a lawyer, and I'm very happy to put my knowledge into making the environment strive. So yeah.
Thank you, Elena. Great to meet you, and thanks for joining us. Over now to you, Gaurav.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I am Gaurav Godwani. I am founder of Civic Data Lab. And what we're trying to do here is trying to connect data, tech, design, and social science to strengthen access to public information and civic engagements in India. I'm a technologist turned social entrepreneur. So we're trying to bring in the learnings from the open source movement into public policy here. We have been working very closely with state and national governments here to bring in public procurement reforms. And I'm going to talk about some of it in the session today. Thank you.
We look forward to it. Thanks, Gaurav. And Carolis, last but not least, tell us about yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ben. So my name is Carolis. I work with Ben at Open Contracting Partnership. I lead our programs here in the European Union and the Balkans. And that, as you might imagine, might mean so many different things. But one of the things it does mean is also caring about green procurement, because European Union is much about that. So, we are trying to understand how to fit in data, technology, and citizen engagements at the core of green transition. And that's not easy. And that's why what we are trying to do, and hopefully usefully. So happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carolis, and great to have you as always. And for good measure, some of you probably, if you joined the earlier session, would have already seen me, but for good measure, I'm Ben Ferns. I'm the Global Head of Infrastructure at the Open Contracting Partnership, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. And this session, as I said, is the Setting the Sustainability Standard for Public Procurement. I'm not going to say much by way of preamble because I really want to hear from our panelists who have so much interesting expertise and experience. I really want to dive deep in that. But really, just by a quick introduction is to say that there's a huge amount of money in public procurement, 15% of global GDP, $13 trillion every year. That's huge amounts of money. And increasingly, as Carolus rightly mentioned, there is this drive towards sustainability at the moment. So I think it's a really timely opportunity for us to have this conversation about what sustainability in public procurement actually means and what we've seen that has worked around the world and what we would like to see that might work around the world to help us get to these sustainable goals. So I'm going to kick us off with a quick question for you, Carolus. You know, as you rightly mentioned, everyone talks about sustainability these days, right? And they talk about inclusion and equity and sometimes interchangeably. And sustainability often means different things for different people. So tell us, what does sustainable public procurement, from your experience, tell us what sustainable public procurement means?
Yes, sure, Ben. Thank you so much. And I agree we should start with that question just to get it right. And there are so many different definitions, but the way I think about sustainable procurement is predominantly through my own experience in the European Union, and what we call sustainable procurement here is something that's called strategic procurement, which is about three things really. It is about environment. It is about social added value, so social procurement with social impact, and economic development as well. We have been looking at environmental impacts a little more lately here, but if we are talking about sustainable procurement, that's how I understand that. And of course, within each of those packages, you open kind of a Pandora screen. If you want to talk about environmental procurement, you can talk about CO2 emissions, waste, resource reuse, energy efficiency, water use, recycle, you name it. So there's a lot to unpack within each of those categories, but it's really about social, economic, and environment that I would frame it as sustainable procurement.
Thanks, Carolus. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, right? That it's not just one thing or another thing, but really something that sits at that intersection of economic, environment, and social good. So absolutely agree with that. And I appreciate also, of course, that sometimes in different interventions or different programs that they might not be able to always hit that sweet spot in the center of that, of that intersection. And so they may have to choose one or the other. So what do you think about that? If someone is not really sitting, like if the interventions or the procurement reforms are not really hitting that sweet spot at that intersection of the three aspects that you mentioned, what do you think about that? Like, is that a starting point or is that the end?
That is absolutely. And you know, when I've started looking at environmental or sustainable procurement here, I've realized, okay, well, there's so much commitment out there. We kind of agree that procurement by default will have to be sustainable very soon. So countries like Lithuania, and I'm sure Elena will tell you more about it, you know, have decided to go 100% of green procurement by 2023. From 3% of green procurement 2 years ago. What does that mean? That you have a major transition to do. And when you start digging deeper into understanding, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to go green procurement? You realize that we don't even have a shared definition. Some countries qualify green procurement when they have 5% of their value being green. Right? And they go, this is green procurement. Lithuania, for example, chose a way to go with 50% of value, and hopefully that will increase later. But some other countries are really lost with these definitions. So what we at OCP have been trying to do is to help our partners, primarily governments, understand things. How do you qualify procurement as green? If you understand how to qualify procurement as green, how do you set targets? How do you know 100% is 100%? How do you know that 100% of procedures and procurement output will actually translate into better CO2, less CO2 emissions, right? And there's a major gap globally in actually grappling with these questions, understand what to measure, what technology is needed, what data is needed to be able to measure these objectives and track objectives. Like if you ask a procurement authority in an average EU country, how do you know how much you contribute to Green Deal objectives? Very, very likely that's going to be a very tough question to ask. And that's where we see ourselves, because we have been working with open data in the shape of open contracting data standard, which is the way to collect data in a standardized, structured way, measurement methodology, stakeholder engagement, understanding how do you integrate these methodologies into better decision making. So how, for example, authorities can start prioritizing their procurement based on CO2 emission potential, for example, and things like that. And there's a major gap, and we're excited to let's say explore that, and data is a huge lever in actually doing that better. But you're right, Ben, it's really challenging, it's big, but it's also exciting, because we are truly at the beginning of understanding of how to transition to green using public procurement.
Thanks, Carolis. And that's a good segue as well to learn more about the work that you've been leading at the Open Contracting Partnership on how we are working to make public procurement more sustainable. So can you tell us more about that and the work that you've been leading on those fronts?
Oh yes, and if you allow me just a couple of minutes to share a few slides, I will show you exactly how we can help right now with the thinking. So let me just quickly share my screen, and I will take you right to this slide I want to show you, which is what are we as OCP thinking in the field. So lately we have been looking at how, as I said, how open data can enhance green procurement process. And if you look at all the stages from market analysis all the way to contract monitoring, for example, we have found that open data has a huge role to play. But we've decided to, first of all, focus on what we have right now, and that is understanding how current procurement data can be useful in tracking sustainable objectives, right? So we launched a resource late last year on how open data can throw light on sustainable procurement, meaning that we show how data can be helpful in tracking green procurement objectives. But of course, that was the first step. And right now, what we're doing is we're looking at very detailed methodologies on using open data and technology to be able to understand your CO2 emissions behind contracts, how to measure life cycle costing, how to bust myths, for example, that green is more expensive, for example, through measurement, through better data collection. We're trying to tackle that question. Also, uptake of green procurement. How do you know how much green procurement there is across institutions, geographical areas, different segments of goods and categories of services? And also through the angle of economic development, because we all understand that procurement is the way to also penetrate market transition to green, to create that demand from government to produce more goods and services in green ways. So practically speaking, within those categories of CO2 emission, life cycle costing, we are looking at exactly what to measure, how to do that, how to estimate, for example, carbon value, and this is an example, how to benchmark carbon procurements, how to start gathering data you need, and how to analyze and report on that data so that you move from data to insights to be able to produce better decisions. So practically speaking, this is going to look partly something like this. When you have like a specific goal, I want to reduce CO2 emissions, and moving to a specific KPI, which is, for example, reducing carbon value associated to public contracts. And then there are there's a list of indicators that you can track with, a list of methodologies and data needs. So all that dirty but very, very relevant work with data we are trying to work on right now. And of course, it's not only about data and technology, right? Let's not forget a bigger picture, that what we're looking for is really First of all, for more and better insights, right? So that we continually grow our green markets, so that we can improve procurement outcomes, so that we can optimize operations, predict future trends, and have actionable insights using data and technology. Elena will tell you more about the Lithuanian practice, so I'll quickly just say that Lithuania is exceptional in a way that it uses data and insights into better decision making. I'll leave it here, but for example, an example from the UK also shows that you can use data to predict CO2 emissions behind contracts. So for example, if you see that one of your contracts is promising 90% of all emissions across all departments throughout the year, you might want to focus on that one contract to get it right, as opposed to prioritizing other contracts. So it's kind of a nudging approach that they are using. Extremely interesting experimentation. As I said, at the core of it is good, standardized, structured, deep data. And once you have, for example, implemented open contracting data standard, a journey becomes much, much easier, because all the methodologies that I'm speaking about and calculation ways and everything are driven by open contracting data standards. So I'll just conclude here very quickly is that all of what I said, and if we translate into the question, so what can we do together? How can we work together? Well, first of all, we have been watching the field, and we are very happy to share what we have seen. So if you want to know who's doing what, probably OCP is a good place to start, because we have been observing who's doing what. Secondly, we can look at what data you have right now and tell you what is possible in terms of measurements and where are major gaps. So we can tell you that you can measure that, but you cannot measure that because you don't have data, for example. So that is something that we are very happy to assist with the help desk with the help of our help desk technology sort of experts that work on data. And lastly, we are developing a few collaborations with few governments on an actual hands-on developing of monitoring and engagement mechanisms in the field of green procurement. So that is basically going all the way in terms of the support and in terms of understanding how does really technology, data, and engagement fit in your context with your data, with your systems, with your people that you have in your context. So we'd be excited to engage with more partners and help you do that. So I'll stop here. And I took a bit more time, I suspect, but I hope it's also useful.
Absolutely useful. And I always really enjoy listening to you talk about the sustainable procurement work, which I think is so key and so important. And I really enjoyed the examples that you showed on, decarbonization of procurement, and those indicators were really useful. I'm curious to know what plans they are to go beyond carbon. I mean, obviously, carbon is absolutely fundamental in the climate debate, and keeping temperature rises below 2 degrees, etc. But we talked earlier about the intersection of sort of environment, social, and economy, and that's what real sustainability actually means. So, curious to know whether this existing guidance also touches on those other broader dimensions of sustainability, or are there plans to do something along those lines in the future?
Yes, and to keep it very, very brief, it touches upon two other areas, which is, as I mentioned, social dimension and economic dimension. So we also want to understand how to better promote gender-driven procurement and promote gender equality, not only in participation level when you have contracts given to women-led businesses, but also understanding pay gap, for example, of procurement participants. Understanding how procurement outcomes translate into gender inequality or equality. When you have stories like, buildings being designed for predominantly male decision makers who don't really understand that somebody might be having a baby in that building. For example, a gross oversimplification here, but illustrative very much. And believe me, that is very, very common. And when you have that design, procurement design in way in you know, in that inclusive way, it does make a huge difference, and we're looking at that field very, very seriously. And also, last thing I'll mention is the economic development. Mostly, it has been about business participation from underprivileged communities, and also small medium enterprise engagement. So we do have measurement methodologies to understand how much SMEs are participating in your procurement, what data you need to be able to actually do analysis around underprivileged communities. In different countries, that means different things. Like in Italy, it's about age, geography. In some other countries, it's more about gender and things like that. But absolutely, yes, to keep it short, we are looking into different dimensions and trying to grow our expertise in those two.
Thank you, Carlos. And I loved your examples as well, because that's what really drives things home for people, right? And I think that, you know, very often when procurement is not designed for the beneficiary in mind, that's when we get problems, right? We see it a lot in infrastructure, when you get infrastructure that's designed, for example, by men for men, you know, not taking into account, for example, that, you know, when women take public transportation, they often tend to make more stops because they're picking up children, getting the groceries, you know, doing multiple errands, etc., before coming home. And when the connections for your trains or buses, etc., are not well aligned, you know, that makes it very difficult for mobility, you know, related to gender issues, or even if, you know, there are alleyways or underpasses that are not well lit, and then that becomes security concerns and things like that. So absolutely, you know, take your point on that, and then love to, you know, see the work as it goes along, because it's absolutely crucial to the debate that we're having today. So I'd like to move now to Elena. And I know that you've been working with Carolus a lot. So before we dive into your presentation, just curious to know if you have any reflections or anything to add from what Carolus has just shared.
I think Carlos has said enough. We haven't been working so much together exactly for now, but I'm very interested in the growth of open data and what Carlos mentioned about the carbon emissions being calculated per every contract. So that's where we are heading in Lithuania also. But of course, these changes take time. There's a lot of programming and data gathering. So I don't want to talk about things that are only in the process and more in the beginning parts of a process. But I really, really just second the idea of not only stating that we need to make procurements green, but also telling the society, the policymakers that, look, this is how much CO2 we have saved, this is how much water and electricity we have saved, and if taking it even further, even the gender or just generally social issues can be combated through public procurement. So I just see it as a great tool, and that's that. But I really, yeah. And I don't know, maybe I can begin.
Yes, please. We'd love to hear from you and your experience in Lithuania implementing sustainable public procurement, and eager to know more about how you're driving green procurement, and, you know, what has been done to date, and also what else needs to be done and how we can go further.
Yes, so since this is a 10-minute presentation and there's a lot of things to cover, I just try to focus on certain things. So I'm going to talk about green public procurement in Lithuania, where we stand and what's ahead, and what role does open data play. This is just a quickie. I must have included this slide. So for those who don't know where Lithuania is, it's in Northern Europe, one of the 3 Baltic countries. Our capital is Vilnius, and we have a population of 2.8 million. And I think that big countries and smaller countries might have a bit of a different issues, of a different struggle when they're implementing GPP. So I think that it's not like our example is unrelatable to bigger countries, but just to keep our size in mind is good. So the way we define GPP in Lithuania, so GPP definition includes the mandatory minimum GPP criteria, but also refer to eco-labels, environmental management systems, and standards. And starting from 2021, since we are trying to make every procurement green, So in cases where mandatory minimum GPP criteria are not set, which are currently set for 32 product groups. So, but if for example, I'm buying something else, I have the ability, the procurers have the ability to set environmental criteria independently according to certain established principles. So for example, there's going to be use of less natural resources, less electricity, or the products will contain reused or recycled materials. So in the key areas, we are for sure giving an understanding of what's green and what's not. So we have set the criteria, and in mostly in services, it's sometimes hard to set the criteria. For example, if someone's procuring translating services, and then they're asking us, so how do I make this procurement green if there's at first sight not so much of impact to the nature? So, well, of course, we always encourage that the contracts would be signed in digital forms this way, or maybe to consider more of team meetings rather than live meetings, especially if the persons would have to meet from different towns. But that's just an example of maybe a problematic area in making every procurement green, because there are procurements that aren't as obviously, that don't have as obvious negative impact on the nature. So we also don't want to greenwash things to call a procurement green if there was a digital contract. But we are in the process of understanding how to reach those goals. So I think it's all fine. And as for the goals we have set, so our first goal was set in second half of 2021. So we have said that in 2021, we want to reach 10% of green public procurement. We count green public procurement per value, not per the amount of procurements made. And we have successfully reached 16.2% in 2020. Oh, sorry, I just realized that I have a little bit of flaws in the data, but it's okay, I'm going to correct them by word. So in 2021, we reached 16.2%, and we have a goal to reach 50% this year. So far, we've reached 43.8%. So of course, it's not final, but it's good to see a tendency that, just like Carlos mentioned, we just recently had 3.3%, and now we're on our way on reaching 50%. So it shows that setting goals does help with actually reaching those goals. And another thing about setting goals, that if you want to set a goal, there has to be a way of measuring, of supervising whether those goals are actually being reached. So it's not enough to just give a generalized statement that we are trying to make our procurements green. And that's where open contracting and open data comes into play. So first of all, open data allows you to track the progress. And for me, as a policymaker, as a representative of a policymaking institution, it's important to track on how GPP goals are being implemented, and just check on whether we are in the right place or not. We have the ability to compare the progress. So for example, when I have a lot of open data, a lot of sources of data, I can just, let's say, see how hospitals are doing, and I can see that hospitals are doing well, and public schools maybe in smaller regions aren't doing so well with green public procurement. So just having the open data and the contract information being publicly available helps to make better decisions then. It also allows to identify the problematic areas. So if you sort out data by product groups, you can see whether food procurements or construction procurements or car procurements were the more problematic ones. And Last but not least, open contracting gives you a more objective data than public surveys. So public surveys will never gather the data that 100% fits the reality, as it's impossible to survey each and every procurer. Having said that, we still conclude public surveys. They are still important, but it's just very beneficial to have the data. So for example, we conclude a public survey where we gather 300 respondees of the procurers, but there are thousands of them. So it's good for us. It's always beneficial for us to know the whole picture. In the surveys, maybe we ask for certain more concrete questions, the questions that open contracting cannot provide us answers to, but it's just the survey will never be as objective as the actual open data. And now I will proceed with our scoreboard. So this is just a snippet of our scoreboard, which Public Procurement Office has prepared. So here you can see the 43.8%. That's how I see it when I check on our progress. And we do it, we really use the scoreboard every day or every other day. So it's not just some thing that someone has created and it has been collecting dust somewhere in the corner. So the data can be sorted by the exact procurer. So these, by the way, are just a few points of what data can be sorted by. I just maybe selected the more important for the green public procurement. So we can sort the data by the exact procurer. And for example, subordinate institutions for the Ministry of the Environment have a goal to reach 90% of green public procurement this year already. So we can track the progress, not only the general level of GPP, but also in the just exact institutions. And we can contact the exact institutions with asking them, how are you doing? Is everything well? And if it's not going well, what are the problems that you're facing and how can we help? You can also sort data by the type of procurer, for example, municipal versus central administrative subject. You can sort the data out by products purchased, so whether they were goods, works, and services. You can sort out the data by the exact product group purchase, such as medical equipment, furniture, dyes. So we can check on what was the level of green public procurement, let's say in construction area, which is one of the most impactful towards the environment. And you can also sort out the data by the type of tender, for example, whether these were published or unpublished negotiations and so on. And this next slide is a snippet from, this is almost all Lithuanian, so it's you don't have to read in it. I'm just giving you an idea of how it looks like. So for example, I see that the number, like yesterday, I log on to the scoreboard, not log on, I just go to the site, and I see that the number of GPP has risen. And I'm like, okay, I need to check on who did their homework and who risen the percent. So then I can sort out the data. I can see all of the contracts of public procurements that included the GPP criteria that were, well, I can just sort out the green public procurements and I can see what was being bought, what was the evaluation criteria? Was it the price? Was it price quality? Was it LCC? I can see the name of the tender. I can see the amount, the price. I can also find the exact contract and then check on what exact criteria were implemented in the contract. So I'm just right now just giving you an example of what I use in my daily work life, because I don't want to talk about open data being just a theoretically beneficial thing, because I already see it being just crucial, just absolutely crucial in case we want to actually reach our goals and we want to be sure that we reach them and to see on what level have we reached them. If we're not reaching 100%, we will still be able to identify what level was reachable in such a short time, etc. So that's about it. We have in Lithuania some more exciting projects regarding open data and public procurement. But as I said, I think there will be time to tell you about those when they're actually implemented. So that's where I would conclude my presentation and gladly answer you any questions. So thank you. Ačiū. Ačiū is the Lithuanian way of saying thank you, and it's easy to remember because it's like sneezing, you know, ačiū. So yeah, thank you.
I love it. Ačiū. So that was a fascinating presentation, Elena. I had two questions for you. So firstly, in terms of the green procurement criteria, how is that calculated? Is it that just that any contract should have some kind of element of some sort of green criteria, or is it something more specific than that, where you have, I don't know, for example, specific targets for maybe using sustainable timber or recycled materials or something like that?
Yeah, so in cases where the product, where product groups have certain criteria set, those criteria are based on the European Commission criteria. So they are, so let's say if we talk about buying paper, the paper needs to be made sustainably or have a FSC eco label of sustainable foresting. And so, yeah, the criteria, you cannot just, in cases where product criteria are set, the criteria are very concrete. There's not much of interpretation, but only in those product groups where the criteria aren't set, but which are usually the groups that aren't as environmentally damaging, let's say, then the criteria are more general, set according to the principles. But yeah, we do include the recycled materials, we do include the energy efficiency, we do include the, well, we try to procure only electric cars in Lithuania, etc. So yeah, the criteria are quite concrete.
That's really useful, and that's very clear. And one final question on that is, what has been the response or the reactions from the different government departments or officials?
Yeah, so it's actually we recently concluded a public survey. So what I'm going to tell you now is the data of the survey. So generally, only 25% of procurers that were the respondees in the survey see the implementation of GPP as a negative thing, and the rest see it, so a bigger part, more than half of respondees see implementing GPP in Lithuania as a beneficial, as something that's like really beneficial, and they support the goal. But for example, when it comes to 100% goal, we ask them, do you feel like this goal is possible to achieve? And only 7% of organizations sadly think that it is possible. It might be due to the how fast we need to reach that, because sometimes the products, well, if you're buying, for example, some cleaning equipment, procuring green is not going to be much more expensive. If you're going to be buying an electric car, it is going to be more expensive. But I agree with Carlos that we need to keep in mind the whole life cycle, not only the price of the contract, but the purchasing organizations have certain budgets set for this year, and if there's no strategy inside the like 10-year strategy or longer time budgets, then those procurers are just mostly scared of not having enough money to buy the greener products, or even not every green product is easily available on the market. So that's also hopefully gonna change throughout the years. So I'm not gonna give you my word that we will reach the 100% goal. We'll see how it goes, but we are at least trying to do everything. The goal is not, for me personally, the goal is not that 100%. For me, the goal is to teach the purchasing organizations to, you're gonna buy certain things anyway, so it's better, like I myself as Elena, as just a person, try to buy things green, to use less plastic or not use any plastic at all. So I really want our governments to do that as well. So yeah, we're just trying to teach them how to do it, to teach them how to, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, and everything starts with an education, right, or a re-education on how we do things and how we think of things differently. So I really like that. So on that very encouraging note, I'd like to move over to Gaurav and hear more about the work that you are leading. Gaurav and Civic Data Lab are doing in India. So tell us a bit about the main challenges that are facing sustainable public procurement in India, and also we'd love to hear about what Civic Data Lab is doing and some of the innovations and tools that you're pioneering to set the sustainability standard in India. So over to you, Gaurav.
Thanks a lot, Ben. So I think the major challenge in sustainability, and I think I can start sharing my screen as well, has been that the access to information on where public procurement is happening, how it is happening, and the granularity of that information is currently not there. So India spends an astonishingly large amount of $530 billion on public procurement. And this accounts to 20 to 30% of our GDP. But it's very difficult to actually measure where these procurements are happening, in what state they are in, measuring the socioeconomic aspects of how these procurements were taken at different locations. All of that is currently a challenge because India's open data policy doesn't include public procurement, and there is no specific focus by the governments to publish this information in machine readable format. So most of this data is currently buried under CAPTCHA, and it's not yet accessible in a way which could be used to analyze where our priorities are. And that becomes the major challenge in understanding sustainability. Also, for a country like us, I think we look into sustainability slightly in a broader sense. We are looking into ensuring public procurement delivers the basic services needed by the most vulnerable population. We see sustainability as how are we creating a ground for our future generation? What are we leaving behind for them? And how vulnerable our children and pregnant women would be. Measuring that aspect would be crucial. And lastly, how well are we doing climate adaptation? How well are we preparing for green procurement and other aspects of climate adaptation? So this opaqueness is like one of the major challenge which we have to overcome. And how we are trying to do this in several locations in India. So one such example is from Himachal Pradesh, where we built Fiscal Data Explorer, an open data platform which gives you information of budgeting, spending, and public procurement all at one place. And it helps you map process efficiencies in how government is working. It helps you understand the fiscal planning aspect of how the several departments are good at planning their procurements, planning their budgets, and in ensuring they spend their amount on a timely basis. And also how each department and procuring agency is working to promote participation in their geography. So these three aspects we looked into, and we created something known as Public Procurement Index specifically for public health and drinking water in Himachal Pradesh. And that's how we as Research Lab got started working on public procurement. This was our first ever prototype with the Himachal Pradesh government using the data they have been publishing. So we wrote the scrapers, we scraped the data, we cleaned that data in a couple of weeks. We standardized it on open contracting data standard, and then we overlaid all of that information on a map so that it's easy to understand for everyone. And we mapped them to sustainable development goals, SDG targets specifically related to public health, drinking water and sanitation, so that you know which district is performing better compared to others in the state. And for each district, we presented a detailed report card on how they can further improve the efficiency, value for money, and competition, giving them clear indicators on how they can strategize and upgrade their public procurement planning in things like how much time they should give for bid submission, reduce the cost overruns, increase the participation from social entrepreneurs and local entrepreneurs, etc. All of those were combined in this report card. And then we moved from Himachal Pradesh to another state, which is Assam, and just giving a very sneak peek of where Assam is. So Assam is in the northeastern part of India. It's actually the bridge to all the northeastern states. And it's a relatively bigger state in the northeast, and it has a population of 31 million almost a decade ago. So currently it would have easily increased to close to 35 million. And it has a GDP of $50 billion itself. So we looked into how several tenders in Assam worked in the last 5 years. We looked into close to 30,000 tenders and worked with the government to open up all of this data. Our long-standing advocacy efforts with Assam government, with using them, we publish all of this information in public domain. And we mapped it to open contracting data standard. We understood where are the issues related to efficiency, competition, etc. in Assam. And overall, we saw that the state is relatively doing better in last 2 years. It has really progressed on some of the issues it was facing 5 years ago. So there were some really great stories, but those were buried because the government was not quite open in publishing this information. So once they started to make this information published, I think there are more stories which can come out and more guidance which can come out from this old data. And that's where we collated all of this and created what we call as Assam Public Procurement Explorer. It's an open data platform where all of this contracts data, all the data analysis on several KPIs, several stories, data stories published by us and other stakeholders could be hosted at one place. It's an open source tool which enables you to look into any state. This could be replicated to any state which has been converted their data in open contracting data standard, to look the holistic picture of how state is performing over the course of last couple of years. And then we dived into doing 2 specific case studies, one for infant mortality, maternal and child health in Assam, looking into what are we leaving for our upcoming generation. So what we did is we mapped the infant mortality rates in Assam with the maternal and child health tenders, specifically looking into the value of the tenders, and did it on a district level to see which are those districts which have higher infant mortality rates, but are not spending enough on their tenders. And we were able to identify a few regions which were doing so. For example, you can see the district in the bottom, Kachar district of Assam. They have high infant mortality rate, but for the last 5 years, they have not been able to increase the amount of tenders and the tender value. While there are other districts like Barpeta, Lakhimpur, Golaghat, who have lower infant mortality rates, but have been having high tender values in those regions. So this is how resource planning and mobilization can also be informed using public procurement data, which we're trying to work with the National Health Mission department in Assam, as well as the finance department, to see if this could be adopted and fixed in upcoming months. Another case study is to look into floods. So Assam is also hugely flood prone region. It has one of the largest river in the country, the Brahmaputra River. And the Brahmaputra River is known for changing its course every year, which causes a lot of displacement of vulnerable population, especially in rural parts of Assam. So what we thought is we can look into linking fiscal, geospatial, and socioeconomic data to improve flood-related procurements in Assam, so that there is much more climate adaptation plan for floods here in the region. So what we did is we mapped all the data of flood procurement of last 5 years, overlaid everything on a map. And we realized that not all of that could be overlaid because geographical information in tenders is not very explicitly given in, say, tender title, tender description, and even tender documents. That became a major challenge. So we showed this as a prototype to the government that we were able to geocode close to 2,300 tenders. But if you improve your data standards, improve ensuring that geolocation information is present always for flood procurement, then we would be able to map much more. So this is how the procurement map looks like for floods. You can see there are certain districts which are procuring much more, and they're closer to the river also, while certain districts are procuring much less. So that's how you can see the patterns just by overlaying this information over map. But if we start looking into other information like flood exposure, how are certain districts affected by flood much more compared to other districts, then you are able to see whether these tender values are justifiable or not. Similarly, if you start to map socioeconomic vulnerability, which are the states which have certain socioeconomic issues which are affecting the performance of of public procurement there, or leaving certain populations much more vulnerable, then you are able to see the districts which need more attention. And similarly, fiscal vulnerability. Where are the losses happening because of floods over the last 5 years? Be it the agriculture loss, be it the loss in life, be it the property loss, livestock loss, etc. And all of that you can measure and see which districts are underperforming and where we need to invest more. So this led to creating what we are calling as a flood procurement composite index, which lets you prioritize certain districts in a state much more compared to others based on this composite vulnerability score, which we have created using several data sets on fiscal, geospatial, and socioeconomic information. And this would help each of these districts to come up with their own disaster management plan, as well as inform their public procurement plan for upcoming years, so they are better prepared for floods next year. And now we are moving from district level to sub-district level, to the revenue circles, to the villages in these districts, to identify which are most vulnerable villages in revenue circles where efforts need to be prioritized. So this is how we are hoping the data can inform the climate adaptation plan as well as the disaster management plan in the state of Assam. And overall, we see public procurement ecosystem, once it's more data driven, I think it can improve MSME participation from micro, small and medium entrepreneurs. It can improve government's value for money. It can enable more timely reporting, can help on alerts and monitoring, can do sectoral analysis and overall increase the civic engagement. And that's all we are trying to plan in upcoming months in Assam, using the tools and the platforms which we have built. So yeah, I would pause here and see if you have any questions for me.
Thanks so much for that, Gaurav. And that's fascinating. I really love the way that you're using all of these different data sets to make sense of what people need and looking at all these multiple dimensions. So joining up procurement data, environmental data, planning data, social impact data, and bringing that all together so that better decision making can be made. So I think that's so striking, and particularly the examples that you showed on maternal and child health. There are clear correlations between greater spending with lower mortality rates, and I can see also with floods, that kind of preventative, sort of future planning or future proofing investments in whether it's infrastructure, defenses or flood relief, whether it's food packets or medicines, etc. This is so absolutely useful. Can you tell us what the appetite from the different departments in the state has been? Like, have How are they receiving this, and what has that process been like?
Right. So I think the initial reaction was from them that we didn't know this much was possible from the data which we are sitting on. So even they were surprised that once all of these data sets could be brought together, a lot of new insights or information could be brought into the conversation. So that was the first reaction, I think over the course of last couple of months, we have seen they're warming up. They're warming up for more collaboration. They're losing that fear that this data is going to show them just in the bad light, but they're now seeing that this data can also help them work with other stakeholders and plan better for the several problems the state is facing. So that's a very positive response we have got lately.
Absolutely, it does sound very promising. And one final question before we move on to Erica. So I'm eager to know also, I mean, India is such a huge place, but what are the opportunities for replicating this in other parts of India? How replicable or how scalable is it?
Right. So close to 20 states among all 30 plus states and union territories in the country use a same software for procuring tenders, which is Government of India's software of procurement. The federal structure of the country allows every state to choose the software they like, but close to 20 states are using the same software. So we are working with the national government now to see if that software can have a feature of open data and open data APIs so that that data can start publishing. We're showing that already 2 states, Assam and Himachal, have been on the forefront of opening up that information. Can this be scaled at the national level so that all the procurement planning of the country improves? So we are in the early conversations with the national ministry on this, and we're hoping that this would get adopted, and then it can be slightly more nationwide approach of public procurement being much more open and accessible to the citizens.
That's fantastic. We'll watch the space with bated breath and look forward to how this work progresses. So with that, I'd like to go over to Erica. And before we dive into your presentation, we've heard some great examples from India and from Lithuania. And I wondered, Erica, whether you had any reflections on what you've heard so far.
Thank you very much, Ben. And yeah, it was extremely interesting to hear these examples, and especially how to use data for advancing with the agenda on sustainability. And this would have been one of the elements that I wanted to tackle also in my presentation, but of course I will skip it. But this is one of those, let's say, really important messages that we also try to send to OECD and non-OECD countries, that it's really important to use data and benefit from all those digital technologies that we are already having. So that's why it was really important to hear is really good examples, because this is what we also see, that there are some front runners. So there are some countries which are already leveraging on the data in this respect, feeding policymaking, but also helping identifying all the shortcomings in the system. So what I can say that it was really good to hear that there are already good examples that can inspire hopefully other countries to move into this direction.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And it's so encouraging. I always find it, like you, Erica, so inspiring hearing from those at the cold face of implementation and doing this hard work on the ground. But I'm also really interested to know more about the work that you're doing. And the OECD obviously is doing so much on the policy front on sustainability and leading so many exciting initiatives. So please tell us what, more about your work and more about what the OECD is doing to drive sustainability forwards. I know that you have a number of case studies as well. So yeah, please share with us the important work that the OECD is doing.
Thank you very much. And I try to be mindful of time, because I think we are a little bit behind the schedule. And anyway, it's a kind of mission impossible to to present OECD work on sustainability and sustainable public procurement in 10 minutes. I try to share my presentation. I don't know if you can see it and if you can see it in a presentation mode.
Yes, we can see
it. Okay. Yeah. Is it in presentation mode as well?
It's not in presentation mode yet, but we can see the slide.
And now it is. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, OECD, of course, is doing a lot on sustainable public procurement. Carolis mentioned this strategic use of public procurement. And this is also the way how we are usually talking about sustainable public procurement, to use public procurement in a strategic way to deliver on sustainability, to pursue broader policy outcomes, other strategic policy objectives. As you know, one of the main tasks of OECD is doing comparative analysis, collecting data from our members and non-members about what they are doing in terms of sustainable public procurement, or about the strategic use of public procurement. And what we see in countries is, of course, they are using more and more public procurement in a strategic way. And usually in most of the countries, there are policy and regulatory frameworks to support these kind of strategic use of public procurement. As I mentioned, OECD has been promoting the use of public procurement as a strategic policy tool, I guess, for almost 2 decades now. We started with focusing, of course, on green public procurement. And I just checked again before my intervention. It was in 2002 when OECD countries adopted the first recommendation on green public procurement. And those who were already, let's say, in this business in 2002, they know that at that time, it was not that obvious that public procurement can be used for these kind of purposes. So that's why I think OECD was really a front runner in promoting green public procurement. But of course, since then, we are also focusing on other elements of sustainability. Carolis already mentioned that in their approach, sustainable public procurement includes not just the environmental elements, green elements, but also the social development and the economic development of sustainability. This is the same, of course, for the approach of OECD. And maybe what I also would like to mention here, what we see in most of the countries, that this is still a big challenge, how to find the balance between these 3 pillars of sustainable development and how they can incorporate this balanced approach in public procurement. I also would like to mention that we would like to launch a survey really soon, which is now focusing on green public procurement. Although I said that, of course, also for us, sustainable procurement is much more than green public procurement. But in the last 2 years, we focused on social elements of public procurement or sustainable public procurement. And this year, we would like to focus again on green public procurement. We will launch this new survey on green public procurement soon. So hopefully later this year, let's say in October, when OECD is organizing its usual OECD Public Procurement Week, we can already present much more recent data and up-to-date data. And I know that the previous session focused on infrastructure, but as I mentioned in my introduction, infrastructure is also a really important topic for us. It's the, let's say, other work stream that we are focusing on. And OECD adopted a recommendation on the governance of infrastructure in 2020. Of course, this recommendation is focusing not just on public procurement, but on the whole infrastructure life cycle. It has 10 pillars. And of course, one of the pillars is linked with the public procurement. There is no time to go into the details, but I just wanted to highlight that last year, we started also work on developing tools to support countries with the implementation of this recommendation, and also developing indicators, because these indicators are also really important to understand what is the state of play in a country in terms of, let's say, infrastructure related procurements, or in general infrastructure projects and their governance framework. And we already made the first round of the benchmarking exercise last year. And one of the elements of this survey covered public procurement, again, related to infrastructure projects. I also would like to highlight here a really important element of our work that I think in the past, we had a tendency to focus much more on the main service providers, main suppliers. So for example, if you look at the legal frameworks of most of the countries, or just looking at the European Union directives on public procurement, we see that there are a lot of requirements set up for the suppliers, the main supplier, the main contractor, but we didn't really look at what is happening under this main contractor, so what is happening in the supply chain. So this is what I also wanted to highlight here, that recently we also started to look at more closely the supply chain issues, and also how sustainability can be also ensured in the supply chain. And we also think that it's really important because governments, when they are procuring, purchasing either services, goods, or doing tenders related infrastructure projects, they can set up really high standards towards the suppliers and their supply chains. And this way they can influence the production patterns, business models in different sectors. But I'm trying to say here that, of course, they can set up standards in terms of the labor conditions, safety and health, working environment, or respecting gender equality, or just to name a few. And again, just highlighting here that we had a big program on this specific topic. We called it OECD Program on Integrating Responsible Business Conduct in Public Procurement. And we looked at first the policy and legal frameworks in the different OECD countries, but then we also had a really practical or a practical focused pilot project where we focused on the textile sector and try to understand how responsible business conduct standards can be incorporated into the purchase of textile garment. You can see all the information on OECD. And now, again, just being mindful of the time, I will skip some of my messages because I think we already talked a lot about planning sustainable public procurement, setting the target, then monitoring the implementation of these targets and plans. But I also would like to mention here, and this is also an important part of our work, that what is also important to assess the maturity of the public procurement systems, whether they are really shaped in a way which supports the implementation of sustainable public procurement. And you might have heard about the MAPS tool. This is the methodology for assessing public procurement systems. And you might know that OECD is hosting the MAPS Secretariat. And there is a special module which is focusing on sustainable public procurement. And we already have a really good example with Norway, who used this sustainable public procurement MAPS module to assess their own system in terms of, again, whether it's mature enough to implement successfully sustainable public procurement. And they also used the outcome of this exercise to feed their new strategy on green public procurement. Again, I'm mindful of the time. I'm skipping all these slides because we discussed all these elements. And if you allow me as a final word and the final message, I think it's really important also to emphasize that we really need the business sector to be successful on sustainable public procurement. And in this regard, what OECD is really promoting is having an earlier and longer lasting collaborative relationship with suppliers. It's really important to understanding what are the market solutions, what is the capacity in the market. So this kind of strategic engagement with the market is really important for the success of sustainable public procurement. And as I already mentioned earlier, what is also really important, we have to look at not only the main contractors, but the whole supply chain. And we need tools that can ensure sustainability in supply chains. So this is where I would like to stop. And I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you so much, Erica, for that. I should have mentioned at the start that we had permission from the organizers to go over time a little bit because we started late, but I really appreciate your being so mindful of the time. And there's clearly so much that the OECD is doing on that. And so firstly, I guess some quick reflections from me. I really love that you talked about the whole life cycle of the end-to-end life cycle of procurement. So not just like the contracting and tendering, but really from planning and design right all the way through, particularly for infrastructure, that's so key, like really starting from the very start, where a lot of the big problems happen. So I absolutely agree with you on that. And I thought you also made a really great point about the supply chain, which often gets forgotten. Like people often don't think about the broader impacts of how it affects things across the different parts of the supply chain. So I think those are absolutely also really, really important points. I had a couple of questions for you very quickly, and we haven't received any questions from the audience either, for any of the panelists. So I'm going to abuse my position as moderator a bit to keep on asking questions. So I guess my first question is, from the work that you've been doing, benchmarking all the different strategies and innovations in different countries, eager to know where you see the front runners are. Where do you think that the most exciting work is being done in sustainable public procurement?
Thank you very much for this question. And of course, it's a really hard question because there are some countries which are traditionally somehow front runners with sustainable public procurement. I think from Europe, these are traditionally the Nordic countries. So for example, Norway, Sweden, but also we can see really good initiatives in for example, in Denmark. But on the other hand, we can see that, of course, I should have mentioned the Netherlands as well, because they have a lot of really good initiatives, and especially in infrastructure, because I know that there is also this special interest for infrastructure. But what we also see that there are so many other good initiatives from other countries, especially recently from Canada with the greening government initiative, also with from the US. And maybe what I can also mention here that sometimes we have the tendency to focus on the central government level, but you can see really good initiatives from regional level and also from cities. And sometimes these cities, which are somehow, of course, smaller in that sense that they can maybe better organize themselves and better, and they are better able to link their strategic priorities with the implementation of these policy priorities in their practical and daily work. So this is what we also see, that there are a lot of cities and smaller regions or bigger regions who are also doing a lot in terms of sustainable public procurement. And I have to admit, we even had some really good cooperation recently, for example, a region in Italy or a region in Portugal, the Central region, and they were experimenting with circular procurement. I'm really happy to share the links to this project if you are interested in, because we even prepared some short videos about this work and their ambitions. So I hope it was a reply to your question. Again, it's really hard to pick up countries or even regions and cities.
It was a very good reply. I really enjoyed it, and I would love to see those links as well. So if you have them to hand, please do drop them in the chat. And I also absolutely agree with your point on cities, where we are also in our work at open contracting seeing so much movement and so much activity at the city level, and agree with you that that's the chance where where we might be able to see things move faster and get to impact quicker. And in fact, we just worked with the World Economic Forum on the G20 Smart Cities Alliance and developed the open contract and model policy there for the G20 Smart Cities. So we can share the link for that in the chat as well. One final question I had for you, Erica, before we go, is that we've seen so many different initiatives on sustainable procurement and sustainability all around the world. Everything from FSC certified initiatives to MSC and different things. And is there a risk of sort of initiative overload? And what would you recommend or advise in terms of streamlining those initiatives so that it can be easier for implementers to do this type of work?
Again, a really difficult question, but I think it's an absolutely relevant and valid question. There are standards outside a lot, it's true. On the other hand, I think all of us try to find globally accepted standards, or at least standards which are fully aligned with internationally accepted standards. Of course, I'm coming from an international organization, which main objective is to set up these kind of global standards. Maybe I can just mention again the MAPS initiative, because I think it's a really good example for doing this kind of, let's say, standardization. The methodology for assessing public procurement systems, so the MAPS tool, was developed already 2 decades ago, but a couple of years ago, a lot of, let's say, players who are interested in public procurement came together and they reviewed the existing tool and developed a new tool, and exactly with this goal to harmonize let's say, the main messages and main principles around public procurement systems. So basically, the aim was to develop a universal tool, a tool that can be applied for all economies, for all countries, for all procurement systems, without, making this kind of differentiation that there are the more developed countries, there are the developing countries. So this was, I think, a really good example. And it was not just a simple revision of the tool, but they also really tried to incorporate all those elements that, for example, we discussed here about sustainability, but also some other really important issues that we didn't really touch upon today, like professionalization in public procurement, and so on and so on. So I would say that, for example, MAPS, for assessing the maturity of a public procurement system, can be a good example for this kind of, let's say, harmonization of different tools.
Thank you, Erica. That makes complete sense to me. And I really like the way that you framed it as well in terms of harmonizing these different initiatives. That makes total sense. So conscious that we're a minute to the end. So would love to, well, firstly, thank you all for your great interventions. It's been really a great experience for me. I've learned so much from all of you. And maybe just by way of closing, we could go around the room very quickly. And if I could ask you for what is the one thing you would like to see on sustainable public procurement moving forward into the future? Let's start, maybe I'll just go around the room from my screen. So maybe let's start with Elena. What is the one thing you'd like to see from public procurement for sustainability?
This is just the first thing that came up to my mind is I'd like to governments govern themselves as well as they govern the citizens. What I mean is when we set our GPP goals, it's our public sector's time to lead by example and to show the society that it's doable and it's beneficial.
Thank you, Elena. So quickly to Gaurav, Karolis, and then back to Erica.
So for me, I think sustainability would happen more if we have more co-creation from local, regional, national, and international level. So opening up more doors where multiple stakeholders can come together and reuse rather than creating always new things is gonna really help the stakeholders have more sustainable procurement.
Thanks, Doris. Carolus?
With so much going on and so much emerging knowledge out there and practices and examples and projects, I want the field to stay focused around genuine impact. Right? Don't forget what we are trying to do here, which is have positive impacts on the environment, social and economic environment as well. So just stay impact oriented. That is the only message I would like to leave the audience with.
I love it. And Erica, last but not least.
Thank you very much. Originally, I also wanted to say something around the lead by example, as Elena mentioned. So what I would like to say here, maybe just referring back to my last slide. So I would like to see much more engagement between the public sector and the market, and would like to see them to work together for a much more sustainable world. So maybe this is what I expect from the next couple of years.
Thank you. Great. And on that note, I think we can bring our session to a close. Thank you all for staying a little bit later. I know we started late, and thank you for the organizers and the audience for staying on with us. I think this was such a great conversation. I really enjoyed the discussion. So thank you to all the panelists for all your great interventions. Thank you to also PPS for organizing all of this, and to the audience that we have both online and in person. So with that, I hand back over to PPS.
Thank you, everyone. I think we can leave the room now. And thank you once again. And I will see you around soon. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you so much.